He fell asleep at the wheel in Seoul. He woke up in a stranger's body at the city gates, clad in chainmail that weighed on his shoulders like a sack of stones. And above his eyes, a line from one of the MMOs he'd designed was glowing. Marked for death. 46 seconds until the end. Daniel Park blinked through someone else's eyes. The hands aren't his. Broad palms covered in calluses, short, rough fingers grip the halberd shaft, polished by thousands of similar grips. A bell tolls overhead. The ringing reverberates through his ribs. Before him stands a stone archway, and the road disappears into the fog. And then a wave of someone else's memories washes over him. His name is Corbin Lane, 43 years old, guard of the northern gate of Hoengraive. His wife is Annalie. His son Thomas is 7. His daughter Mira is 4. He remembers the smell of porridge in the mornings, the creak of the third step, how his daughter grabs his little finger at the market. These aren't his memories, but they hurt as if they were his own. And he used to be a game designer, lead balancer at a Seoul studio. For 8 years, he patched exploits and fixed mechanics that players broke. He knew every cheap trick by heart, every way to cheat the system. He fell asleep at the wheel. And here he is. The timer is ticking. 45, 44. And that's when professional deformation kicks in. When you see a timer, you don't scream. You read the conditions. Marked for death. That means someone will come and kill him, on schedule, like a scripted event. 38 seconds. Daniel designed these himself. A guard at the gate. A newcomer enters the city. The guard turns away. A knife in the back. The quest is launched. Everyone's happy except the guard. 32 seconds. Knuckles turn white on the handle. No, not today. Daniel rushes to the panel. If there's a status window, there's a system. If there's a system, there's a shop. Show me the shop. 26 seconds. The panel swivels open, and he sees something he wouldn't have expected even in a nightmare. Dev Shop. Developer-level access. That very admin panel he used to bust cheaters with every day at work. Currency. 1 credit balance. 20 seconds. There's one item in the shop, highlighted by a gold frame. The marker isn't the plot's target, removes the mandatory script event flag from the object. Cost, 1 credit. 15 seconds. Daniel buys it. The panel clinks. Balance 0. A red line flashes. The timer disappears, like a line of code deleted from a script. 20 seconds later, a man approaches along the road, young, in a gray hooded cloak. He stops across from him, opens his mouth, closes it. Confusion flashes across his face. He looks at the guard. He looks at the gate. He shrugs and walks past. Footsteps fade on the cobblestones. Daniel slides down the wall. He drops the halberd. It clangs against the cobblestones. He looks at his own unfamiliar hands, at the calluses he didn't rub in himself, at the copper wedding ring. Corbin had worn it for 17 years. Daniel has worn it for 46 seconds. The bell tolls again. The shift continues. Daniel stands up. He picks up the halberd. He stands up straight. A merchant with a cart passes through the gate and nods to him. Daniel nods back. He doesn't know what to do next, but he knows one thing. He is alive. And someone up there in some script has just lost his training corpse. He stands his watch until sunset. Merchants, a patrol, peasants, and an old woman with a goat pass through the gate. Corbin's body operates on autopilot and knows instinctively whom to nod to and whom to salute. But Daniel's mind is far away. He studies the panel. The dev console hangs in his peripheral vision like a second monitor. Metadata reading is available. He tries it. He fixes his gaze on the merchant. Pale text appears above his head. Class, Merchant, Tier 1. Flag, Participant in Side Quest Number 7.
Will offer the player a delivery after the third dialogue. The merchant has a mustache and a tanned neck, a living person, but the system sees him as a function, a quest giver. Daniel looks at the young guard at the second gate, a guy named Hayden. Class, City Guard, Tier 0. Flag, Victim of Quest Number 19, dies during an attack on a merchant caravan. Event in 11 days. Hayden has freckles. He's 20. Daniel turns away. Just another training corpse on the schedule. At sunset, he hands over his post to the night watch. Corbin's memory guides him through the streets like a navigator. Right at the square, past the well, through the archway into the lower quarter, the second house from the corner. A blue door with peeling paint. Daniel stands in front of it and can't bring himself to raise his hand. Behind the door is a family. Not his family. A wife is waiting for her husband. Children are waiting for their father. And instead, a game designer from California has come. The door opens on its own. Annalie is on the threshold. Short, chestnut hair in a bun, an apron stained with dye. A seamstress. Corbin knows this, which means Daniel knows it too. She smiles and says that dinner is getting cold and that Thomas got into another fight with the neighbor's boy. Daniel steps over the threshold. It smells of bread and herbs. Thomas is dangling his legs at the table with a black eye and a satisfied expression. Mira is on the floor building a tower out of blocks. She looks up and says one word. Dad. Daniel sits down. Annalie sets a bowl of barley soup in front of him. The spoon is on the right. Corbin was right-handed. Daniel picks up the spoon with his left hand and only then notices his mistake. Annalie either doesn't see it or pretends not to. After dinner, Mira asks him to tie the apron on her rag doll. Daniel takes the ribbons, but his fingers won't obey him. His thick, unaccustomed fingers are used to a halberd, not ribbons. He ties it crookedly. Unties it. Ties it again. Mira watches closely. Then she takes the doll and ties it herself. She's 4, and she does it better than he does. The bedroom is cramped. There's just one bed with a sagging mattress. Annalie has already gone to bed. Daniel lies down next to her. There's a hand's width of space between them. After a minute, her breathing evens out. She sleeps next to her husband, just as she has every night for 17 years. Daniel lies with his eyes open. The ceiling is low. Beams, a spider web in the corner, water dripping behind the wall. He lies in a stranger's bed next to a stranger's wife, under a stranger's ceiling with strangers' children behind the wall, and he doesn't sleep until morning. The morning began with the smell of porridge. Annalie was already up. Daniel could hear her moving downstairs, the clatter of dishes, whispers. Thomas was asking something, and Annalie answered quietly so as not to wake her father. Daniel lay there staring at the ceiling. Wooden beams. The same spiderweb. He hadn't slept a wink. All night long, he'd been going over the same thing in his head. He was in a game world. He had an admin panel.
He had 0 credits. He had 11 days before the 20-year-old guy with freckles was killed. And he has someone else's life to live in such a way that no one notices the switch. He went downstairs. Mira was already sitting at the table. She saw him and raised her arms. Corbin used to pick her up every morning. His memory told him this instantly. Daniel picked her up. The girl was light. She wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her nose against his cheek. Daniel froze. For a second, it seemed right to him that this was his child, and that made it even worse. Annalie set a bowl in front of him, porridge with honey, the very same one he remembered from Corbin's memory. He ate with his left hand. Annalie looked at the spoon, then at him. She said nothing. Daniel switched the spoon to his right hand.
His fingers didn't obey him well, but he managed. He needed to be more careful.
The walk to the gate took 20 minutes through the entire lower quarter. Daniel walked and looked around. The city was alive, truly alive. Cobblestone streets, houses with tiled roofs, shop signs, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery, the smell of leather from the workshop, the smell of manure from a passing cart. Hoengraive was a trading town on the northern route. Corbin's memory knew every stone here, and Daniel saw it from above. Metadata. He walked and read. Above the baker hung Class Artisan, Tier 1. Flag, Robbery Target Quest 22. Trigger, the player will rob the shop in the 3rd week. Above the boy dragging a bucket, Class Resident, Tier 0. Flag, Random Victim. Trigger, will be hit by a spell during a skirmish between players. Event, undetermined. Above the old woman selling apples, Merchant Class, Tier 0. Flag, Prop. No triggers, just background. Daniel stopped. Prop.
The living woman with wrinkles and calloused hands was marked by the system as a prop. She didn't even have a scheduled death. She simply existed as part of the scenery, so the players would have something to look at as they passed by. He walked on, toward the gate. Along the way, he counted the flags. 11 residents of the lower quarter were marked as quest victims. 3 of them were children. Hayden was waiting for him at the gate, a 20-year-old guard with freckles. He smiled and said the night had been quiet. Daniel looked at him and saw the tag. Quest victim number 19. Trigger, dies when attacking a trade caravan. 10 days. No, it's already been 10. Daniel nodded and took his post. Halberd. The gate. Morning fog. A guard at the gate. He spent the first 2 hours studying the dev console. The panel was painfully familiar. He'd been working with systems like this for 8 years. The interface was different, but the logic was the same. Balance, 0 credits. Available functions. Reading metadata for free and without restrictions. Access to DevShop requires credits. Right to issue patch notes. 1 update per week. Cost depends on scale. Quest flag rebinding. Cost depends on quest level. And at the bottom, in small print, credits are awarded for fixing broken systems, for every closed exploit, for every fix to something players use to their detriment. The dirtier the exploit, the more credits. Daniel read it 3 times. Not for kills, not for quests, for repairs. The system was paying him for what he'd been doing his whole life, finding bugs and patching holes. Only now the stakes were different. Now, real people were dying from bugs. Around noon, a merchant caravan pulled up to the gates. 4 wagons, guards, a merchant in an expensive cloak. Daniel checked the passes and read the metadata. Merchant, merchant class, tier 2. Flag, neutral. Guards, mercenaries, tier 1. Flags clean. Everything was in order. And then he saw a 5th cart. It was lagging behind the caravan by 100 paces. The driver was young, too young for the trade route. Daniel read his metadata and felt a chill run through him. Class, player, level 4. Class, berserker. Disguise, active. In inventory, a fake invitation scroll from a Category C mayor. Flag, triggers the quest Massacre in the Lower Quarter in 6 hours. Daniel gripped the halberd shaft. 6 hours. In 6 hours, this smiling guy in the cart is going to stage a massacre in the very quarter where his children live. Corbin's children. His children. The cart pulled up to the gate. The player jumped down and approached. He looked like an ordinary traveler, dusty clothes, a light bag, a friendly smile. He took out a scroll and handed it to the guard. He said he had an invitation from the mayor, that he had come on business. Daniel unrolled the scroll. The seal looked genuine. For an ordinary guard, that would have been enough. Corbin Lane would have let him through without a second thought, but Daniel could see the scroll's metadata. Item, fake scroll. Category, C. Created by starting item generator. Purpose, bypassing the initial check. Daniel held the scroll and thought. He had 0 credits. A patch note costs credits. He couldn't just kick the player out. A Tier 0 guard doesn't have the authority to refuse the bearer of a seal. But he had 1 free edit per week. He hadn't used it yet. Daniel opened the dev console. He found the patch notes. He entered the text. Category C invitation scrolls in Hoengraive require a counter-signature from the owner of the Grey Goose Tavern. Apply. The panel flashed. The edit had been woven into reality. Daniel felt something shift quietly in the air, as if the world had blinked. He looked at the scroll. The seal had faded. Where there had once been a single signature, there was now a space for a second one. Empty. Daniel looked up at the player. Polite, calm. He said that, unfortunately, the scroll was incomplete. For Category C invitations, a counter-signature from the owner of the Grey Goose Tavern is required. It's standard procedure. The tavern is in the main square. Ask Uncle Merrick. The player frowned. He said he knew nothing about a second signature. Daniel shrugged. He said rules are rules, and there was nothing he could do. The player took the scroll and headed into town. Daniel watched him go. Uncle Merrick. Corbin's memory pulled up everything it knew. A man in his 60s. He'd been running the tavern for 30 years. A former captain of the city militia. 3 grandchildren in the lower quarter. Daniel looked at Merrick's metadata, which he had read that morning on the way. Class, innkeeper, Tier 1. Hidden class, sleeping peacemaker, Tier 3. Special skill, persuasion, master level. Daniel sent the 4th level berserker to the master of persuasion, to the man who had spent 30 years talking to drunken mercenaries without ever raising his voice. To the old man whose 3 grandchildren lived in the very quarter they were about to wipe out. All that was left was to wait. Daniel stood at the gate, checking passes, nodding to merchants. An hour passed. 2, 3. On the 4th hour, the berserker emerged from the city. He looked different, neither evil nor good, confused.
He walked past the gate without glancing at the guard. Daniel looked at his metadata. The massacre in the lower quarter flag had disappeared. In its place was a new flag. Quest declined by player. Reason: voluntary refusal. A light flickered quietly in the corner of the panel. Plus 27 credits. Daniel exhaled. 27 credits. For one old man talking a young boy out of doing something foolish over a mug of beer. No one died. No one even knew they'd been in danger. The guard at the gate stood at his post and did his job.
That evening, Daniel walked home and counted 27 credits. Hayden's rescue. Rebinding the victim's quest flag must be expensive, but he has 10 days. 10 days to earn more, to fix something. Find an exploit and patch it. He reached the blue door, stopped, mentally shifted the spoon to his right hand, opened the door. Annalee was standing at the table, slicing bread. She turned and smiled. Daniel smiled back. Corbin's smile. On the third day, Daniel began to make a list. Not on paper, in his head. 11 residents of the lower quarter were marked as victims, 3 children among them. Guard Hayden would die in 9 days. The baker would be robbed in the 3rd week. The boy with the bucket would be hit by a stray spell. And this was just 1/4 of 1 city. Daniel stood at the gate and thought like a balancer. The problem was systemic. He couldn't save everyone one by one. Rebinding a single quest flag cost credits, a lot of credits. He had 27. That might be enough for Hayden. Or it might not. He didn't know the system's rates for flags of that level. He needed to check. Daniel opened the dev console and found the rebinding section. He mentally selected Hayden. The system displayed the cost. Remove the quest victim number 19 flag from the target Hayden Roven, 35 credits. Or rewrite the trigger from dies upon attack to an alternative outcome, 20 credits. Daniel chose the second option, 20 credits. He had 27. But if he spent 20 now, he'd have 7 left. And there were 2 weeks until the big patch, and the problems would only grow. He stood there thinking. In the morning, a girl walked past the gate. Young, strong, with sunburned forearms and soot in her hair. Corbin's memory recognized her instantly. Yenna Haldor, the town blacksmith's daughter. She was carrying 2 swords wrapped in cloth over her shoulder. She was taking them to her father's shop on Armory Street. Daniel read her metadata and stopped. Class, Blacksmith's Apprentice, Tier 1. Hidden stat, blacksmithing skill 87 out of 100. Her father's skill was 74. The daughter was better than her father. The system knew it. The world knew it. But the swords bore the mark of Haldor the Elder. Not Yenna's. Her mark didn't exist. Daniel made a mental note. It was important but not urgent. Right now, Hayden was more important. He spent the day watching the flow of people through the gate. Merchants. Peasants. 2 wandering monks. Daniel read everyone's metadata and looked for exploits. He looked for something that could be fixed. Toward evening, he found it. A caravan of 4 wagons was carrying goods from the south. The caravan's guards. 6 mercenaries. Daniel read their metadata and froze on the 3rd mercenary. Class, Mercenary. Tier 1. Hidden flag, duplicated inventory. Bug. The mercenary was carrying 20 arrows in his bag. And 20 more arrows. The same item copied twice. A classic duplication bug. Daniel knew this glitch. In his old game, bugs like this allowed players to multiply resources endlessly. Here, the bug was in the NPC, but the principle was the same. The system was broken in this spot. Daniel opened the dev console, found the bug in the inventory system, fixed the duplication. 20 arrows instead of 40. The mercenary didn't even notice. The panel flashed. +3 credits. Not much, but better than nothing. 30 credits. 20 left until Hayden. 9 days left until quest number 19. Daniel spent the next 3 days hunting for bugs. He checked everyone who passed through the gate, every item, every inventory, every flag. He found a merchant whose counter reset the price to 0 on the 3rd restock, +5 credits. Found a traveler whose quest marker was stuck and pointing to a non-existent village, +2 credits. Found a cart whose wheel was marked as indestructible due to an error in the durability parameters, +1 credit. Small change. Every bug was small change. But the small change added up. By the 6th day, he had 41 credits, enough for Hayden, with room to spare. On the evening of the 6th day, Daniel found his moment. Hayden was standing alone at the gate. Night shift. Daniel approached as the shift supervisor and said he'd check his gear. Standard procedure. Hayden stood at attention. Daniel put his hand on the guy's shoulder and opened the dev console, rebinding the quest flag. Target, Hayden Roven. Current trigger, dies when attacking a trade caravan. New trigger, survives an attack on a trade caravan if he is more than 30 paces away from the lead wagon. Cost, 20 credits. Apply. The world blinked. Quietly, imperceptibly. Hayden felt nothing. Daniel withdrew his hand, said the equipment was in order. Hayden smiled and thanked him. 21 credits remained. Daniel went home. His heart felt light. For the first time in 6 days, he had saved a life. Not with a sword, not with magic, with a line of code. 20 credits for 1 life. Cheap or expensive, he didn't know. But Hayden would live. The 20-year-old guy with freckles would live because the guard at the gate had rewritten the condition in an invisible script. On the morning of the 7th day, Yena Haldor approached the gate, this time without swords. She carried the shards on her shoulder, a broken blade. Daniel recognized the sword by its metadata. Item, longsword. Owner, traveling player. Status, broken. Reason, hidden debuff. Crack at the base. Broke on the 23rd hit instead of the standard 200. Yena stopped at the gate. She was angry. Daniel could tell by the way she was clutching the shards. She said the player had brought the sword to her father's shop 2 days ago. Her father had repaired it. The player left. The sword broke in the very first battle. The player returned and caused a scene. He accused the blacksmith of fraud. He smashed the display case. He made threats. Her father apologized. He apologized for work he had done correctly because there was a defect in the metal from the start that no ordinary blacksmith would have seen. But Yena saw it. She said she had warned his father. She said the crack was there even before the repair. His father didn't listen. Daniel looked at the debris and read the metadata. Yena was right. The crack at the base debuff had been embedded in the sword since it was created. A manufacturing defect, a bug in the weapon generation system. Blacksmith Haldor physically couldn't have seen it, but Yena saw it, because her blacksmithing skill was 87, not 74. Daniel picked up the shard. He turned it over in his hands.
He said he wanted to ask her for a favor. The mount on his halberd had broken. A lie. The mount was fine, but he needed an excuse. He said he wanted her specifically to fix it, not his father, her, and to put her own mark on it, not Haldor the Elder's, her own. Yenna looked at him as if he were crazy. She said she didn't have her own mark,
That the Blacksmiths Guild rules didn't allow an apprentice to put a personal mark on anything. Daniel replied that, as a city guard, it was important for him to know exactly whose work was on his weapon, that it was a matter of accountability, that he would put a report. Yenna was silent. Then she said she would do it. She turned and left. The shards remained on her shoulder. Daniel watched her go and opened the dev console. A weapon generation bug. A hidden debuff crack at the base on randomly generated swords. Spawn rate 4 per 100 units. He found the root of the bug in the system, fixed the generation parameter. The panel flashed. Plus 12 credits. Daniel smiled. 33 credits. Fix the world. One bug at a time. That evening at home, Annalie asked why he was smiling. Daniel said it had been a good day. Annalie looked at him for a long time. Then she said that Corbin had never said it was a good day before. He used to say, okay, or same as usual, but not good. Daniel froze, a spoon in his right hand. The porridge was getting cold.
The kids at the table. A wife who watches and sees too much. He said he was probably getting older and softer. Annalie didn't answer. She turned back to the stove, but Daniel saw her tilt her head slightly. That's what people do when they hear a false note. They're not sure, but they hear it. That night, Daniel lay awake, thinking about how many such notes he had already played and how many more Annalie hear before she realizes she's dealing with a stranger. Daniel began systematically hunting for bugs to earn credits. He rewrote Hayden's trigger and saved him from a scripted death for 20 credits. He met Yenna Haldor and asked her to put her own mark on the job. He fixed the weapon generation bug. Annalie begins to notice inconsistencies in her husband's behavior. On the 8th day, it rained. A cold autumn rain that drove half the city under cover. The gate was empty.
Daniel stood under the awning of the guardhouse and listened to the water pounding against the iron helmet. The dev console showed 33 credits. There were 6 days left until the big patch. 6 days before the tower released a new wave of players and the old ones gained access to endgame content. Permission to storm the capitals, to kill kings, to redraw the world map. For Hoengraive, this meant one thing. The city would become a starting zone for newbies. Dozens, maybe hundreds of players would pour through the gates, and each of them would see the residents not as people, but as experience. Daniel watched the rain and did the math. 1 free edit per week. He'd already used his, the next one in 3 days. Everything else cost credits. 33 credits. Is that a lot or a little? It depends on what you're buying. He opened the dev shop and began exploring the catalog he'd never looked at before. Items, modifications, tools. Prices varied for everything. Small modifications were cheap. Remove a debuff from an item, 2 credits. Fix a broken script, from 1 to 5 credits depending on the complexity. But serious things cost a lot. A citywide physics rule modification from 50 to 200 credits. Removing the start zone flag from a location, 300 credits.
300. He had 33. Daniel closed the shop and exhaled. 300 credits. That's impossible. In 8 days, he'd earned 41 credits and spent 20 on Hayden. The pace was too slow. He needed to find something bigger, a larger-scale exploit. Around noon, the rain let up. A lone rider passed through the gate. Daniel read the metadata and sat up straight. Class, player, level 12. Class, ranger. Guild, none. Flag, solo. Inventory, 340 items. 3,500 items. Daniel took a closer look at the inventory. Among the standard swords and potions, there was something strange. 280 identical elixirs. Small health potion. Type, basic. 280 of the exact same thing.
Daniel recognized this pattern. A farmer. The player had found a way to duplicate potions and was hoarding them, or had found a merchant whose stock had been reset to 0, or had used an inventory reset bug. Daniel intercepted the rider at the gate. He asked to see his trading permit, a standard check. While the rider rummaged through his bag, Daniel traced the item's history through the metadata. Found it. A merchant in the village of Rainfield, south of Hoengraive. The bug? When purchasing more than 10 potions in a single transaction, the system reset the counter and gave the next 10 for free. The cycle repeated endlessly. A classic integer overflow. Daniel had seen bugs like this hundreds of times. He fixed it, right through the dev console. Fixed the merchant's bug in the village 40 kilometers from Hoengraive. The panel flashed. Plus 18 credits. 18. It was a major exploit. Because dozens of players had passed through that merchant, and each had taken hundreds of free potions, the economy of an entire region had been distorted. Daniel closed the loophole, and the system paid generously. 51 credits. The rider found a permit and presented it. Daniel let him through. The potions remained. The ones already in the inventory hadn't gone anywhere, but there would be no more free ones. For anyone. The next day, Daniel changed tactics. Instead of waiting for bugs at the gates, he began actively searching. In the morning, before his shift, he walked through the market. Every stall, every merchant, every item. Metadata. Bugs. Exploits. He found a hardware store where the locks all had the same hidden code, and any key fit any lock. Plus 7 credits. He found a set of arrows at the gun shop on Upper Street that the system classified as consumable, but didn't remove from the inventory after use. Infinite arrows. Plus 9 credits. By the evening of the 9th day, he had 67 credits. The pace had picked up, but 300 was still a long way off. Daniel returned home and was met with a scene that stopped him in his tracks. Anneli was sitting at the table with a needle and some fabric. Before her lay his old leather belt, Corbin's belt. She was mending the slot for the buckle. That was normal. She mended his things all the time, but next to it on the table lay an open notebook. Corbin kept records. Simple notes. How much bread cost, when to repair the roof, who he owed a penny to. Anneli looked at the notebook and then looked at Daniel. She said she'd found the notebook in his bag, that she'd decided to check the entry about the debt to the shoemaker, and she'd seen the last page. Daniel went cold. He didn't write in the notebook. He didn't write anything down.
but last night he'd opened it mechanically and made a note, out of habit, just like he did at work when he logged the bugs he found.
The note was in Korean. 2 characters. He hadn't even noticed that he hadn't written in the common language of Ayrton. Annalie was holding the notebook and looking at him. She asked what those letters were. She said she'd never seen anything like them, that they weren't commercial shorthand or runes. Daniel sat down at the table. He picked up the notebook. He looked at his characters. 2 symbols. He had written repair in Hangul, in Corbin's handwriting, in the notebook of a guard from a fantasy city. He closed the book and said it was nonsense, that he'd picked it up along the road from Southern merchants, that he'd just been trying to write them as symbols. Annalie looked at him. She didn't believe him, he could tell, but she didn't argue. She nodded. She went back to the belt. The needle moved smoothly and confidently. Annalie sewed in silence. Daniel sat across from her and realized the circle was closing in. Every day he made small mistakes, the spoon in his left hand. Words Corbin didn't know. The hieroglyphs in the notebook. Reactions that didn't match the memory of the husband she'd known for 17 years. Annalie was smart. Quietly smart. She didn't make a scene. She didn't ask direct questions. She observed. She gathered. And sooner or later, what she had gathered would be enough. At night, Daniel lay and listened to the rain outside the walls. Annalie breathed beside him. The children slept behind the wall. 67 credits. 5 days until the big patch. 300 credits for removing the launch zone flag. A wife who is beginning to realize that her husband isn't her husband. A guard at the gate. A stranger's life. A stranger's home. A stranger's love that was becoming less and less like a stranger's with each passing day. At dinner today, Mira asked again to tie the apron on the doll. Daniel tried. His fingers obeyed him better, not perfectly, but better. Mira took the doll and said that Daddy was learning. 4 years. She had seen it all. On the 11th day, a trade caravan was attacked. Daniel found out about it in the morning when Hayden ran up to the gate, pale and out of breath. The caravan was attacked on the approach to the city, a kilometer from the north gate. Bandits from the rift. 6 beasts. The caravan's guards engaged them. Hayden was on patrol and saw the smoke. He ran to help. Daniel listened and felt his heart pounding. Quest number 19. Attack on a trade caravan. Hayden was supposed to die, but Daniel rewrote the trigger. Hayden survives if he is more than 30 paces away from the lead wagon. Daniel asked where exactly he had been during the fight. Hayden said he was running toward the caravan but tripped over a root and fell. By the time he got up, the fight was already over. The guards had handled it. He hadn't even made it to the wagons. 30 paces, a root. The world had orchestrated the fall to fulfill the trigger condition. Hayden was angry at himself. He said he'd disgraced himself, that he'd tripped like a little boy. Daniel put his hand on his shoulder and said that the main thing was that he was unharmed. Hayden didn't know that this root had saved his life, and he'd never find out. Daniel let go of him and checked the metadata. The Quest Victim 19 flag had disappeared completely. Status: Quest complete. Victims: 0. Hayden Roven, alive. 20 credits. The best investment of his life.
The day went on. Daniel stood by the gate and counted. 4 days until the big patch. 67 credits. He needed 300. Impossible. The gap was too wide. Even if he found one major exploit a day, that's a maximum of 15 to 20 credits. Over 4 days, that's 60 to 80. Total, 130 to 150. Half of what he needed. He needed something else. Not minor bugs in merchant inventories, not duplicate arrows. Something systemic. Something that breaks not just a single item, but an entire mechanic. Daniel closed his eyes and thought. 8 years of balancing.
Thousands of fixed bugs. The most valuable exploits were always tied not to items, but to the rules. Not a broken sword, but a broken formula. Not a duplicated potion, but duplicated experience. He opened his eyes. Experience. Daniel began checking the experience gain system through the player's metadata. Every player who passed through the gate carried an experience log, where each point came from, what it was awarded for, what multiplier was used. Daniel read the logs as he read balance tables at work, quickly, habitually. On the 3rd player of the day, he found an anomaly. Player class, Mage, level 8. Experience log, 4,200 points for killing a wolf. Daniel blinked. 4,200 for a wolf. The wolf was a level 3 creature. Standard reward, 30 points. 4,200 is 140 times the norm. He dug deeper. Multiplier, Rift Zone +2. Multiplier, Nighttime +1.5. Multiplier, First kill of this type +3. Multiplier, Group bonus +5. Multiplier, Streak bonus +8. Daniel did the math. 30 times 2. 60 times 1.5. 90 times 3. 270 times 5. 1,350 times 8. No, that was wrong. The multiplier shouldn't be multiplied together, they should be added. Base experience plus each multiplier as a bonus. 30 plus 30 plus 15 plus 90 plus 150 plus 240. Total 555. Not 4,200. The system was multiplying the multipliers instead of adding them. Multiplicative stacking instead of additive. Classic. The most devastating bug in the history of online gaming. Because of this bug, a group of players could earn as much experience in one night in the Rift Zone as a regular player would get in a month. That's exactly why some players were level 12 just 2 weeks after launch. Not because they were better, because the system was multiplying their reward by itself. Daniel stood at the gate and felt a familiar chill run down his spine. The same one he felt when he found a critical bug at work. A minute before picking up the phone to call the lead and yell, "Take the server down!" He opened the dev console, found the experience calculation module, found the formula, changed the operation, multiplication to addition. One change, one line. His finger hovered over the apply button. If he did this, every player in Ayrton would instantly stop receiving inflated experience. Every group, every raid, every farm. Levels that players used to gain in days would now take weeks. It would hit everyone, every player in the world, and they would come to sort it out. They would come looking for whoever broke their leveling, and the trail would lead to Hoengraive, to the gates, to the guard.
Daniel stood and thought. His hands were wet from the rain. The halberd glistened. Behind him, in the lower quarter of Mira, a tower was being built out of blocks. Thomas was kicking a ball around with the neighbors. Annalie was sewing a custom dress.
Hayden was walking through the guardhouse with a bruise from a fall, angry at the root. Yenna was hammering away in her father's smithy, 300 credits for taking down the flag, or even more. He didn't know how much this fix would pay, but he knew one thing. It was the dirtiest exploit he'd ever seen in this world. The system paid for the dirt. Daniel pressed apply. The world didn't blink. The world shuddered. Daniel felt it with his whole body, as if something enormous had shifted at the very foundation of reality. The formula had changed. Everywhere. All over Airtan. Right now. The panel flashed, and Daniel stared at the number. Plus 214 credits. 214. Balance 281 credits. He closed his eyes, opened them. The number hadn't changed. 281. Almost enough. But not 300. 19 credits. He was 19 short. 4 days. 19 credits. It was possible. It was absolutely possible. Daniel stood at the gate and, for the first time in 11 days, allowed himself to believe he could do it. That Hoengraive wouldn't become a launch pad. That the lower quarter wouldn't be flooded with blood. That Mira would be building towers out of blocks instead of running from the players through the alleys. That evening, he walked home at a brisk pace. He was practically running. He turned onto Armory Street and saw a light in the Haldor smithy. Yenna was working late. He peeked inside. She was standing at the anvil. His halberd lay before her, the very one he'd given her to repair. Yenna looked up. Her face was smudged with soot. Her eyes were red from the heat. She said she was done. Daniel took the halberd. It was different. Not just repaired. It had been reforged. The fitting sat tighter. The balance had shifted closer to the handles. The blade had been sharpened at a different angle. Better. Noticeably better. And a brand had been burned into the shaft at the base. A small hammer inside a circle. Not Haldor's. Not his father's mark. Yenna's brand. She looked at him and waited. Daniel ran his finger over the brand. He said it was good work, that it was the best halberd he'd ever held in his life. In both. He spoke the last word more quietly. Yenna didn't hear it, or pretended not to. Daniel took the halberd and went home. At home, Annalie was sitting by the window, waiting for him. She said Captain Oswald had stopped by. He'd asked about Corbin. He said he wanted to talk to him tomorrow. In person. Daniel hung the halberd by the door. Captain Oswald. His direct superior. A veteran. He'd lost a son. The metadata Daniel had read on his first day. Class, Captain of the Guard, Tier 2. Flag, suspected possession of a subordinate. Trigger, initiates an investigation upon reaching the suspicion threshold. Current suspicion level, 64%. Trigger threshold, 80. 64%. Every time Daniel did something too clever for Corbin, the number went up. Every time he solved a problem a simple guard couldn't solve. Every time he said words, Corbin didn't know. 64. Not far from 80. Daniel sat down at the table. Annalee served dinner, soup, bread, silence. Mira was asleep. Thomas was reading a picture book by candlelight. Daniel ate with his right hand. He was silent. He didn't smile. He didn't say the day had been good. He said, "It was okay," as Corbin would say. Annalee nodded, but Daniel noticed. Oswald's suspicion level, 64. The dev console didn't show Annalee's suspicion level because Annalee wasn't a script. She was a living person who loved her husband and felt she had lost him, not because he had died, but because he had changed. And for that, metadata. 4 days until the big patch. 281 credits. Need 19 more. Captain Oswald wants to talk. Annalee is silent, but hears every false note. The guard at the gate stands at his post, like every morning.
Like every day. Until the gate closes.
Captain Oswald arrived at the gate at dawn. Daniel saw him from a distance, broad-shouldered. His graying beard is trimmed short, a scar on his right cheekbone. His chainmail is polished, a sword at his belt. He walked unhurriedly, like a man accustomed to being waited on. Daniel stood at attention and saluted. Oswald stopped in front of him. He looked at him for a long time. Then he said he wanted to talk, not by the rules, like a human being. Daniel nodded. Oswald leaned against the wall of the guardhouse. He was silent for a minute. Then he spoke. He said he'd known Corbin Lane for 20 years, that he'd recruited him when he was a green kid from the mountains, that Corbin Lane had never been smart, not in a bad way, in an honest way. Corbin was reliable, simple, solid as a rock. He didn't ask questions. He stood at the gate and did his job, and that was fine. But then, 2 weeks ago, something changed. Oswald listed the changes.
Corbin suddenly started to understand trade scrolls he couldn't read before. Corbin started speaking differently. The words were the same, but the order was different. The thought was different, as if behind the familiar face sat someone who thinks 3 steps ahead. And that trick with the Category C scroll. Oswald made some inquiries. The rule about the counter-signature at the Grey Goose appeared out of nowhere. No official had introduced it. No decree had been signed. But the rule works, and everyone is convinced it has always been there. Oswald fell silent. He looked Daniel in the eyes. He said one word. Possession. In Ayrton, it was neither a curse nor a metaphor. It was a medical diagnosis. The spirits of the rift sometimes possessed people. They altered their behavior. They made the victims smarter or stronger, and then they burned them from the inside out. Oswald said that if Corbin was possessed, then his duty as captain was to report it to the higher-ups. The Templars would come. They perform a purification ritual. If the spirit submits, Corbin will return. If not, Oswald didn't finish. He didn't need to. Daniel stood there and felt sweat running down his back beneath his chainmail. Oswald's metadata hung before his eyes. Suspicion level, 71%. 7 points in a single night. This conversation had raised the counter. Every time Daniel fell silent when Corbin would have answered immediately, every glance to the side when Corbin would have looked straight ahead. 71 out of 80. Daniel made his choice. He looked Oswald in the eyes and spoke in Corbin's voice, slowly,
simply, like a guard who had stood at the gate for 20 years. Said he wasn't possessed. Said he'd been attacked 2 weeks ago. That man in the cloak, who walked past the gate and did nothing, he should have killed him. Corbin understood that, felt it, and when death passed him by, something inside clicked. He began to see things he hadn't noticed before.
He began to think faster, as if his brain had woken up.
Daniel said it wasn't a spirit, it was fear. The fear of death that forced the dim-witted guard to finally open his eyes. Oswald listened. His expression didn't change. When Daniel finished, the captain remained silent for another minute. Then he said one thing: that he would believe it, for now. But he would keep watching. And if he saw something that couldn't be explained by fear, he would do what he had to do. Daniel nodded. Oswald left. The metadata flashed. Suspicion level 68%, down 3 points. Not much, but heading in the right direction. Daniel exhaled and leaned against the wall. His hands were shaking. He had just lied to a man who had defended Corbin for 20 years, a man who had lost a son and saw in Corbin something similar to what he had lost. And the lie had worked, because there was truth in it. Corbin really did have to die, and someone really did change after that. Just not the person Oswald thought.
The day went on. Daniel worked, checked passes, read metadata, looking for bugs. He found 2 merchants whose scales were calibrated with a rounding error in the buyer's favor, plus 4 credits. He found a carrier pigeon whose route flag pointed to a city that had been destroyed 3 years ago. The pigeon was flying in circles and couldn't deliver the letter, plus 2 credits. 28-7 credits. 13 to go. 3 days until the big patch. After his shift, Daniel didn't go home. He went to the herb shop on the Karska Street. He had been putting off this visit for 9 days, but he couldn't put it off any longer. The shop was small. Bundles of herbs hung from the ceiling, the smell of mint and something bitter. A woman stood behind the counter. Pointed ears slightly longer than human ones, a half-elf. Dark hair down to her shoulders, gray, tired eyes. Liel Varn, the city healer, 27 years old. Metadata, healer class, tier 2. Hidden skill, alchemy, expert level. Flag, potential ally. Trigger, activates when providing information about the player's poisons. Daniel knew why he had come. In the dev shop was an item he had set his sights on 3 days ago. A behavior detector. A list of 17 poisons that the new wave of players most frequently use on NPCs, with complete antidotes. Cost 40 credits. He didn't have 40 to spare. Every credit went toward the main goal, 300. But Liel was burying children. The metadata showed this starkly. Event 1, child poisoning. Source, player. Outcome, death. Event 2, child poisoning. Source, player. Outcome, death. Event 3, 4, 5. Daniel stood at the counter and looked at the list of events. 5 dead children in the last year. All poisoned. All by players who tested poisons on little dummies. He couldn't buy the list right now, but he could buy something else. Daniel spoke up, introduced himself,
said he was a guard at the north gate, that, in duty, he sees who enters the city, and that he wants to warn her.
In 3 days, the great patch will begin. A new wave of players, young, aggressive, inexperienced. And among their favorite pastimes is one that directly concerns the apothecary. Liel listened in silence. Her face remained unchanged, but her hands clenched the edge of the counter. Daniel named 3 poisons, the ones he knew from his experience as a balancer, not all 17, the 3 most popular: aconite tincture, silver dust, black vine juice. And for each, he named the basic antidote. Liel looked at him and said nothing. Then she asked how a gate guard knew more about poisons than the city physician. Daniel replied that he listened a lot, that merchants from the south tell stories, that he remembers them. Liel didn't believe him. He could see that, but she wrote it down. 3 poisons, 3 antidotes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Daniel left. It was dark outside. The streetlights were on every other block. He walked home, thinking about the 40 credits he couldn't spend, and about the 5 dead children he couldn't bring back. At home, Anneli was sitting with the children. Mira was drawing on the floor with chalk. Thomas was sharpening a wooden sword with a pocket-knife penknife. Anneli was mending a shirt. Daniel sat down. Anneli served dinner. Soup, bread, silence. Then Anneli spoke. She said that Oswald had come to see her that afternoon, not to see Daniel, to see her. He asked how Corbin was at home, whether he was sleeping, whether he was eating, if he was saying strange things. Anneli told Oswald that everything was fine, that her husband was healthy, that he was just tired from work. She lied. Daniel looked at her. Anneli looked back. She said she didn't know why she lied, that she didn't know what was happening to her husband, that she saw changes every day. A spoon, words, handwriting, eyes. She said his eyes were different. The same brown, the same shape,
but the look was different, as if someone were looking at her who had seen more than Corbin could ever see in a lifetime. And she said she was scared, but not because she thought he was possessed, but because, whoever he was, he treated her better than Corbin did, and she didn't know what to do about it. Daniel sat there, unable to speak. Anneli stood up. She cleared the table. She put the children to bed. She came back. She sat down across from him. She said she wouldn't ask, not yet, but someday she would ask. And then he would have to tell the truth. Daniel nodded. Anneli went into the bedroom. Daniel sat alone at the table, in the empty kitchen, by a single candle. 287 credits, 13 to go. A wife who covers for him, not knowing from whom, and not knowing why. The 12th day began with a discovery that changed everything. Daniel stood at the gate and inspected the morning caravan. 4 carts of grain, the usual route. He was reading the driver's metadata out of habit when his gaze stumbled on the 3rd driver. Class, driver, Tier 0. Flag, carrier of a hidden item. Item, a letter bearing the seal of the broken seal cult. Recipient, an agent in Hoengraive. Content, instructions on preparing the city for the big patch. Daniel didn't move. He checked the pass. He nodded. He let them through. And only when the wagon had driven 20 paces away did he open the letter's metadata.
The content was long. The broken seal cult knew about the big patch. They were preparing. Their plan was simple. On the day of the patch, when a new wave of players floods into the starting zones, the cultists will open the altar of rebirth for free access. Any player who dies in Hoengraive will be resurrected instantly. Endlessly coarse. No penalties. The city would become an arena. Players would kill each other and the locals over and over again, not because they needed to, because they could.
Because resurrection without penalties turns death into entertainment. Daniel stood there and felt the cold rising from his stomach to his throat. The altar of resurrection. He hadn't thought of that. All his plans revolved around capturing the spawn zone flag, 300 credits. But even if he captured the flag, the altar would remain open. Players would respawn. They would keep coming back. Capturing the flag wasn't enough. He had to close the altar, or tie respawn to a condition. Daniel opened the dev shop. He found the edit section for the altar. Edit. Respawning at Hoengraive's altar requires the altar owner's consent. Cost 45 credits. Altar owner. Who owned the altar now? Daniel checked the metadata. Hoengraive's altar of resurrection. Owner, City Council. Status, public access. Flag, awaiting capture by the cult of the broken seal. Event, 6 hours before the big patch. 6 hours until the patch. The cult will seize the altar, take control, open it to everyone. And chaos will ensue. Daniel calculated 287 credits. Remove the starting zone flag, 300. Bind the altar to the agreement, 45. Total, 345. He has 287. He's 58 credits short. He closed his eyes, opened them, recounted. 58. In 3 days. It would be possible if he found major exploits, but after the experience formula was fixed, no major bugs had turned up. Small change, 2 or 3 credits at a time. He needed something else. Daniel thought about it all day. He stood by the gate, checking passes, thinking. By evening, he realized he didn't need to do both. Removing the starting zone flag wouldn't help if the altar was open. The altar was more important. Binding to owner consent, 45 credits. Plus, he could use his free weekly edit. A new week started yesterday. The edit was available. He could write a patch note for free. 1 edit per week. He could either remove the flag for credits or write the edit for free. But the free edit had limitations. Scale. Removing the starting zone flag affected the entire architecture of the world. That was too much for a free edit. But what if he approached it differently? Daniel sat down on a stone bench by the guard post and began to formulate his thoughts. Not remove the starting zone. That's a massive change. Something small, local, specific. Experience gained from killing NPCs is reset within the city limits of Hoengraive. This edit didn't remove the starting zone flag. The city remained the starting zone. Players could still come here, but killing locals no longer granted points. 0 experience. Why kill if you get nothing for it? To a player, an NPC with no experience is just furniture, and you don't break furniture for no reason. Not everyone. Most will pass by. Daniel entered the wording into the dev console. A free edit. The system accepted it. The world blinked. Quiet.
The rule became reality. Now he had one task left. The altar, 45 credits. He had 287, more than enough.
Daniel opened the dev shop. He bought the edit. Resurrection at the Hoengraive altar requires the consent of the altar's owner. 45 credits were deducted. 242 remained. The world flickered again. The altar now belonged to the city council, and to be reborn, he needed their permission. The cult could seize the altar, but the owner's consent was now woven into the fabric of physics. Even if the cult took the altar, the rule would remain. They wouldn't be able to circumvent it, because this isn't a law that can be broken. It's a law of physics. Like gravity. You can't fall upward. You cannot be resurrected without consent. Daniel stood up from the bench. 242 credits. 0 experience for killing an NPC. The altar is under control. It wasn't perfect. The starting zone flag was still up. Players would still come. But now they'd come to a city where killing locals was pointless and dying was painful. That changed everything. That evening, Daniel stopped by Liel's place. She was in the shop, sorting through herbs. He placed a small bag on the counter. Inside were dried roots and powders, the basic ingredients for the 3 antidotes he'd mentioned last time. He'd bought them at the dev shop for 8 credits, as a consumable kit for a Tier 2 healer. Liel opened the bag. She sorted through the contents. She looked up. She said that 2 of the 3 ingredients didn't grow in this region, that the nearest source for one of them was the southern continent, that the guard at the gate couldn't buy them at the market. Daniel said he had good connections with suppliers. Liel looked at him. Then she said quietly, she asked who he really was. Daniel answered. He said he was the one who wanted her to stop burying children. Liel was silent for a long time. Then she put the pouch under the counter. She said she would make an antidote, that she needed 2 days. Daniel nodded and left. 234 credits. 2 days until the great patch. Liel is preparing the antidote. The altar is bound to the pact. The penalty for murder has been reset. The gate stands. The guard stands. Hoengraive is preparing for what he doesn't know. At home, Annalie didn't ask any questions. She just served dinner. She just sat nearby. Mira brought a doll. Daniel tied on an apron. On the first try. His fingers finally remembered. Mira smiled and said that Daddy had learned. Daniel smiled back. And this time, the smile wasn't Corbin's. Daniel intercepted a letter from the Broken Seal cult and learned of their plan to seize the altar of rebirth. Instead of removing the flag from the starting zone, he reset the experience for killing an NPC with a free edit and tied the altar to the owner's consent for 45 credits. He handed Liel the ingredients for the antidotes. Balance 234 credits. 2 days until the big patch. Day 13. The penultimate day before the big patch. Daniel stood at the gate and sensed that the city was changing. Hoengraive was preparing. Not for the wave of players. The residents didn't know about it. The city was preparing for the seasonal fair, which coincided with the patch date. Merchants were hanging flags. The baker was baking twice as much bread. Tailors were sewing festive ribbons. The lower quarter was decorated with flowers. For them, it was a holiday. For Daniel, it was a countdown. In the morning, a girl he had never seen before passed through the gate. Young, short hair, light leather armor, a bow on her back.
Class, Player. Level 6. Class, Pathfinder. Guild, Expelled. Flag, Solo. In-game name, Sadie Morgan. Daniel read the metadata and paused at one point. Reason for expulsion from the guild, refusal to kill an NPC. Codename in former guild, roleplay autist. Daniel checked the pass. Standard, no forgeries. Sadie stood in front of him and waited. She was nervous. Her fingers fiddled with the strap of her bag. Her eyes darted around. Daniel handed the pass back and said everything was fine.
Welcome to Hoengraive. Sadie nodded. Then she stopped, turned around, looked at him, and asked. She said it sounded silly, but asked anyway. She asked if he was real. Daniel looked at her. A girl from another world, a programmer from Portland, who died of an aneurysm. The only player who pays for her bread and apologizes when she bumps into a passerby. The only one out of hundreds who stopped at the gate and asked the guard if he was real. Daniel answered. He said he was as real as she was. Sadie blinked. Then she smiled. A small, crooked smile. The smile of someone who hadn't heard anything but mockery for 6 months. She nodded and entered the city. Daniel watched her go and thought, an ally, a possible one, a real one, not an NPC with the potential ally, a living person who had chosen to be human in a world where that didn't earn you points. During the day, Daniel continued hunting for bugs. He found a few more minor ones, a set of scales with a rounding error, +2. A lamppost that the system considered a destructible object, even though it was part of the permanent architecture. P+1. Small change. 237 credits. By evening, what Daniel had feared happened. A squad rode up to the gates. 4 horsemen, good armor, identical cloaks with an emblem, a gear inscribed on a patch. Patchwork. Daniel read the metadata, and his heart stopped for a second. 4 players. Levels 14, 16, 15, 18. Guild, Patchwork. Type, Elite Guild. Rank, Top 5 in the current wave. Mission, Hoengraive Reconnaissance. Objective, determine the cause of anomalies in the starting zone. Anomalies. Experience reset for NPCs. The counter-signature rule. Alter binding. Multiplier fix. They sensed it. Of course they did. A guild of top players that lives off exploits. Of course they noticed their farming had broken. Of course they came looking for the cause. The eldest of the 4 dismounted and walked the gate. Level 18. Class, Knight. In-game name, Garrett. He looked down at Daniel from above. Literally. The knight was a head taller than the guard. Garrett said they were from the Patchwork Guild, that they had arrived on guild business, that they wanted to explore the city. Daniel asked to see their passes. Garrett smirked. He said that players didn't need passes. Daniel replied calmly. He said that in Hoengraive, everyone needed passes, that those were the rules, that he could issue temporary ones for 2 copper coins per person. Garrett looked at him. Then he laughed, quietly. He turned to his men and said something. Daniel didn't catch the words but read the conversation's metadata. Garrett said, "That one. The very guard they were talking about. Remember his face." They paid 8 copper coins. They entered the city.
Daniel stood and watched them go. They knew about him. One of the players he'd turned away at the gate had told them. The guard who won't let anyone through. The guard who always has a rule.
The guard who doesn't act like an NPC. And now, Patchwork had sent out scouts. 4 fighters a level higher than anything in Hoengraive. They would watch, listen, search, and when they find what they're looking for, they'll return with a report to their leader. The guild's metadata showed the leader's name, Calvin Zhao. Class, player, level 24. Class, strategist. Hidden flag, former game designer. Daniel read that line, and the world narrowed to a single point. Calvin Zhao. Cal. His colleague at the Seoul studio. His office neighbor. The man he argued with every Tuesday at balance meetings. Cal, who believed that players were always right and that NPCs were just props for atmosphere. Cal, who had died of a heart attack a month before Daniel. Cal, who was here, in Ayrton. A level 24 player, the leader of an elite guild, and who had sent scouts to his gates. Daniel closed his eyes. For 8 years they sat in the same office. For 8 years they argued about how the game should work. Daniel said that NPCs deserved a logical life. Cal said that NPCs were just code, and there was no need to invent personalities for them because the players would just run past them anyway. Now the NPCs were real people, and Cal was still running past them. Only now at level 24 and with a guild behind him. That evening, Daniel walked home and tallied his losses. Patchwork knows about him. Reconnaissance in the city. Calvin is somewhere nearby. The big patch in 2 days. In 2 days, it will all begin. 237 credits. He needs more, but not to take down the flag, for what comes next. To protect the city from the guild that decides the guard at the gate is a bug that needs fixing. At home, Annalie silently served dinner. Mira sat on his lap and drew with chalk on a slate. She was drawing the gate, and a figure by the gate, with a halberd. "Daddy," she said, and poked her finger at the drawing. Daniel nodded. Daddy. The last day before the big patch. The 14th day of Daniel Park's new life in the body of guard Corbin Lane. The city was bustling. The fair was in full swing. Merchants were shouting. Children were running between the stalls. Musicians were playing in the square. Hoengraive was living its life, unaware that tomorrow everything would change. Daniel stood by the gate and kept an eye on the Patchwork reconnaissance team. The 4 players had spent a day in the city. They were careful. They didn't break any rules. They didn't bother the locals. They just walked around and looked. Garrett had walked the entire perimeter of the walls. The second one was checking the altar of rebirth. The third was sitting in Grey Goose and talked to the patrons. The fourth stood in the market square and watched the guards. Daniel read their metadata from a distance. They were mapping out the area, marking entry points, counting the guards. They were assessing the levels. They were preparing. Not for an attack, for a report. Garrett found the altar's anchor. Its metadata showed a spike in activity. He discovered that the altar required consent and relayed the information to the guild. Daniel watched the data send out. The guild communication channel. Instantaneous. Calvin would know in minutes. In the morning, the reconnaissance team left the city. Garrett walked past the gate and nodded to Daniel, politely, as an equal. It was worse than a threat. It meant they had assessed him,
deemed him worthy of attention, and they'd return not with a squad, but with an army. Daniel was left alone at the gate. There was a day left until the patch, 24 hours. He spent the morning making a list of what he'd done. Experience for killing NPCs reset. The altar is tied to the owner's consent. Liel is preparing antidotes. Hayden is alive. The duplication bug has been fixed. The experience formula has been corrected. 6 fixes. 6 patches on a world falling apart at the seams. Was that enough? No.
But it was all he could do while remaining a gatekeeper. Around noon, Minna So appeared at the gate. Daniel didn't immediately realize she was a player. She looked like an ordinary girl. Modest clothes, a white scarf on her head, a staff with a sun-shaped finial. Class, player, level 7. Class, priestess. Guild, active, but status within the guild is outcast. Flag, feeds the homeless in the lower quarter. Experience per action, 0. She was handing out food to homeless NPCs. It didn't grant experience. It didn't grant loot. It didn't grant anything. The guild considered her useless. Other players thought she was crazy. She had been doing this every day for 6 months. Daniel checked her pass. Standard. Clean. Minna walked past and went into town. Daniel watched her go. That evening, after his shift, he didn't go home. He went to the lower quarter, to the spot where, according to the metadata, Minna usually fed the homeless. An alley behind the market, a dead end between 2 warehouses. There were about 15 people there. Old people, cripples, 2 children. Minna sat among them and handed out bread from a basket. She bought the bread with her own money. In-game currency earned not from farming, but from day labor. She scrubbed floors in a tavern for pennies. She spent those pennies on bread. She gave the bread to those whom the system had labeled as background, props, living props who wanted to eat. Daniel approached. Minna looked up. She saw the guard. She tensed up. Guards usually chased away the homeless. Corbin's memory confirmed it. Rules are rules. Daniel stopped 3 steps away. He took off his helmet. He looked at her and spoke softly. He said he'd seen what she was doing in the lower quarter, that it was important, that he was grateful. Minna looked at him. She didn't move. The bread froze in her outstretched hand. The old man next to her froze too. Everyone was looking at the guard who had taken off his helmet and said thank you. Minna lowered her head. Her shoulders shook. She was crying. Quietly. Silently. Daniel stood there and waited. He didn't leave. He didn't say anything else. He just stood there. A minute later, Minna raised her head. Her eyes were red. Her cheeks were wet. She asked his name. Daniel said it was Corbin. Minna nodded. She said the name strangely. Corbin Shi, in Korean, with a suffix of respect. Daniel didn't flinch, but inside, something turned upside down. She called him by his Korean name, without knowing, without suspecting, just out of habit. She was Korean. He was Korean, in another life. In this one, he was a guard from a fantasy city, and she called him as she would have called an older acquaintance back home. Daniel put on his helmet, nodded, left. On the way back, he stopped by the Haldor smithy. It was late, but the light was on. Yena was working.
He peeked inside. She was standing at the anvil, forging something small, a knife blade. She saw him and
She said she was making a knife for Hayden's mother. She had ordered it. Not from her father. From Yenna. The first order in her name, with her own hallmark. Daniel asked how her father had reacted. Yenna smiled. She said her father grumbled, but he didn't forbid it, because money is money. And because Guard Corbin, for some reason, had written a report stating that his personal weapon was being maintained by Yenna Haldor's apprentice and that the work was of excellent quality. The report was sitting in the guard's office, an official document, Captain Oswald's seal. Her father couldn't argue with a seal. Daniel nodded. He said he was glad. He went home. Annalie was waiting at home. She was sitting at the table. A new apron lay in front of her, a child's apron, small, with embroidery along the edge. She said she'd sewn it for Mira, for the fair. Daniel took the apron, the ties. He knew how to tie them. His fingers remembered. He tied it, neatly, tightly, on the first try. Annalie looked at his hands, then at his face. She didn't say anything, but Daniel saw. She saw that a month ago those hands couldn't tie a ribbon, and now they could. And that was yet another discrepancy on her list, another note she heard but didn't voice aloud. The night before the big patch. Daniel wasn't sleeping. He lay there staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow the tower would release a new wave. Dozens of players would pour into Hoengraive, young, aggressive, hungry for experience, and they would discover that there was no experience for killing NPCs, that the altar was closed, that there's a guard at the gate demanding a pass. Some will turn back, some will stay, some will try to break the system. And somewhere on the horizon, Calvin Zhao reads his intelligence report and decides what to do with a city where the guard isn't acting like an NPC. 237 credits. 2 changes woven into the world. Liel has the antidote. Allies, Sadie, Min A, Yenna, Uncle Merrick, Hayden, Liel. Oswald, who suspects but still believes. Annalie, who knows but remains silent. The gate stands. The guard stands. Tomorrow. The great patch began at dawn. Daniel stood at the gate and saw it with his own eyes. On the horizon beyond the fields, the shining tower flared up. A pillar of white light shot into the sky and pierced the clouds. The earth rumbled. A faint ringing echoed through the air. And in the field before Hoengraive, people began to appear. People began to appear. 1, 3, 7, 12. They materialized out of nowhere. A flash of light, and in the place of an empty patch of grass stands a person, confused, looking around, with a weapon in his hands and status panels before his eyes. A new wave. The starting zone was operational. Hoengraive was still the entry point. The starting zone flag was flying. Daniel hadn't taken it down. He didn't have enough credits. But that didn't matter. Something else did. Daniel stood at the gate and waited. The first player approached 10 minutes later. Young, warrior class, level 1, a sword in his hand, excitement on his face. He looked at the gate. He looked at the guard. He opened his mouth.
He said he was the chosen hero and demanded to be taken to the city ruler. Daniel calmly asked him to show his pass or pay the entrance fee. 2 copper coins. The player froze, said he wouldn't pay the fools. Daniel replied that in that case, the player was officially outside the city and his quest counter hadn't started. He could wait. The guard would wait too. The player stood there. He watched. He waited for the guard to give in and let him through. The guard stood there. He watched. He waited for 2 copper coins. After 3 minutes, the player paid. He entered the city. Next. 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 By noon, 32 players had passed through the gate. Each paid the toll. Each received a temporary pass. Each heard the same thing. Welcome to Hoengraive.
City rules. Killing locals does not grant experience. Resurrection at the altar requires permission from the city council. Have a nice day. Reactions varied. Some shrugged and went off to look for quests. Others got angry and threatened to come back. Still others laughed and said they'd find a way around it. Daniel mentally noted each one. He read the metadata. He looked at the flags. Most were harmless. Level 1 newbies who wanted adventure, not bloodshed. But 3 stood out. A player with the prone to PvP kills flag. A player with the poison tester flag. A player with the arsonist flag. Daniel memorized their faces. At noon, Sadie arrived. She had passed through the gate that morning and returned at lunchtime. She stood next to the guardhouse. She watched Daniel work. Then she asked if she could help. Daniel looked at her. A level 6 Pathfinder. A loner. A programmer from Portland. He asked if she could read scrolls. Sadie smiled and said she could read code. That's harder. Daniel handed her a stack of passes. He told her to check the seals. A real seal has 3 rings. A fake one has 2. Sadie took the stack and stood by the gate next to him. 2 people at the gate. A guard and a pathfinder. An NPC and a player. Checking passes side by side. By evening, another 20 players had passed through the gate. Sadie caught 2 fake scrolls. She unfolded both. Politely, by the rules. Daniel monitored the metadata and never once intervened. She handled it on her own. Before sunset, what Daniel had been waiting for and fearing happened. A player who wasn't part of the new wave appeared at the gate. An old one. High level. Class, player. Level 22. Class, assassin. Guild, patchwork. Alone, no companions. He approached the gate and stopped. He didn't dismount. He sat on his horse and looked down at the guard. Daniel read the metadata. Name, Vance. Guild rank, officer. Mission, personal assignment from the leader. Content, deliver a message to the guard at the north gate. Daniel asked to see his pass. Vance pulled a scroll out of his bag, but not a pass. A letter. He handed it to Daniel. Said it was from Calvin. Daniel took the letter, unfolded it. The text was short. Daniel read it, and the world around him narrowed. The letter was written in Korean, in Hangul, in a language that didn't exist in Ayrton. 3 lines, 3 sentences. Dan, I know it's you. You fixed my multiplier bug and I recognized your style. We need to talk. Daniel folded the letter. His hands didn't shake. He'd learned to control them over the past 2 weeks. He looked at Vance.
said he'd read it, that there would be a reply. Vance nodded. He turned his horse around and rode off. Sadie stood nearby. She'd seen the letter. She'd seen the unfamiliar symbols. She asked what language it was. Daniel said it was old, very old, that few people knew it. Sadie looked at him. Her eyes changed. They became attentive.
She was a programmer. She saw patterns. And now she saw a pattern that didn't fit. An NPC reading text in an unknown language and not being surprised. She didn't say anything, but Daniel saw it. She was beginning to understand. Not fully yet, not in words yet, but the understanding was already there, behind her eyes, like a shadow. That evening, Daniel was walking home. Calvin's note was in his pocket. 3 lines in Hangul. Cal knew. Cal had found him. Not through a tip-off, not through intelligence, through his style. Through the way Daniel had fixed the bug with the multipliers. Every programmer has their own handwriting. Cal recognized his handwriting, just as one recognizes a signature or a gate. 8 years in the same office, 8 years of the same bugs. Of course he recognized it. At home, Annalee was feeding the children. Mira was wearing her new apron. That very one, the embroidered one. The ties were knotted. Annalee looked at her husband and knew something was wrong. She always knew. She asked if he'd had a hard day. Daniel said yes, hard. Annalee nodded. She poured him some tea, herbal, bitter. Corbin didn't like it. Daniel did. And Annalee already knew that. She'd been serving him tea instead of beer for a week now, silently, without questions. She was adjusting to a man she didn't know, because this man lived in her husband's body and took care of her children and looked at her in a way the way Corbin never had. Daniel sat at the table and drank his tea. Mira climbed onto his lap. Thomas showed off a wooden sword he'd carved himself. Annalee sewed by the window. A normal evening, an ordinary family, a stranger's life that was becoming his. Day after day, apron after apron, a cup of tea after cup. That night, Daniel took out the letter. He reread it. Dan, I know it's you. We need to talk. He knew he had to reply. He knew the meeting was inevitable. Calvin wouldn't back down. He never had. At budget meetings, he argued to the very end. In the game, he went all the way. In Ayrton, he reached level 24 and led an elite guild. He wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. And what did he want? The dev console, admin access, control over Ayrton. Daniel folded the letter and put it under his pillow. He would reply tomorrow. Tomorrow. Today he lay in a stranger's bed, listening to Annalee's breathing and thinking about the man from his past life who had found him in this one, and about what to say to his former friend who treated living people like furniture. The big patch had begun. Dozens of new players had passed through the gates. Daniel's fixes are working. NPC experience has been reset. The altar is closed. Sadie volunteered to stand at the gate to help. Calvin Zhao sent a letter in Korean. He recognized Daniel by the style of the bug fix. A meeting is inevitable. Daniel wrote a reply at dawn. He took out Corbin's notebook. He opened a blank page. He wrote 4 words in Hangul. Gate, noon, 1, unarmed. He turned the page. In the morning before his shift,
He took it to the Grey Goose and left it with Uncle Merrick. He said that if a man from Patchwork came and asked for the guard Corbin, to give this to him. Merrick took the note and looked at Daniel for a long time. Then he nodded. He didn't ask anything. 30 years in the tavern. He knew how not to ask questions. Daniel took his post. The morning of the second day after the patch was calmer than the first. The stream of newcomers had slowed. Those who had arrived yesterday had scattered throughout the city. Some had taken quests from merchants, some had gone to the rift. 3 with warning flags were still in the city. The poison tester sat in the tavern studying the menu. The arsonist wandered through the upper quarter. The PvP assassin stood by the altar, trying to figure out why he couldn't activate it. Daniel monitored the metadata from a distance. For now, all 3 were quiet. For now.
At 10 in the morning, Mine came to the gates. She was carrying a basket of bread,
just like every day. She stopped at the guardhouse. She looked at Daniel. She said she wanted to ask. Daniel nodded. Mine asked if it was true that killing residents no longer granted experience. Daniel confirmed it. Mine asked how that was possible. The world's rules hadn't changed in 2 years, and now 3 new laws in a week. Who writes them? Daniel replied that the world repairs itself, like a living organism. When something breaks, the world patches it up. Mine looked at him. Then she smiled. She said he sounded like a theologian. That's how they explained theodicy in her department. The world suffers, but the world heals itself. She went to the lower quarter, to the homeless, to her bread. Daniel watched her go and thought that the theologian from Portland and the balancer from Seoul were explaining the same thing in different words. Noon. The sun was high in the sky. The shadow from the guardhouse had shrunk to a sliver. Daniel stood at the gate, a halberd bearing the Jaina mark in his hands. Chainmail weighed on his shoulders. He waited, and he was rewarded. A man was walking toward the gate, alone, unarmed, unarmored. A simple shirt, pants, boots, no guild insignia. If not for the metadata, Daniel wouldn't have recognized him. The body was unfamiliar. A different face, a different height, a different age. But the gate. Daniel recognized that gate from 100 paces away. Calvin Zhao always walked like that. Quickly and with a slight sway, as if he were rushing to a meeting and juggling 3 ideas at once. The metadata confirmed it. Class, player. Level 24. Class, strategist. Name, Calvin Zhao. Hidden flag, former game designer. Host body, none. Direct link. Calvin hadn't possessed an NPC. He had appeared in Ayrton as a player, like all players. His own body, his own avatar. Only his skills and knowledge remained the same. He approached the gate,
stopped 3 steps away, looked at the guard, smiled, said one word in Korean.
"Hello." Daniel replied in Korean. "Hello." Calvin looked at him, studied Corbin's face like a code that needed to be deciphered, then said he'd settled in nicely. A guard at the gate, Tier 0, the most useless class in the game, and yet half the bug fixes over the last 2 weeks have come from here. He said he'd checked the multiplier formula, weapon generation, inventory duplication, entry rules, Everything leads to Hoengraive's northern gate. Everything leads to one guard. Daniel was silent. Calvin continued. He said he didn't believe it at first, thought it was a bug, thought one of the tower's new testers was messing around. But then he saw the multiplier fix. Additive stacking instead of multiplicative. Daniel insisted at every meeting that the multipliers should stack. Cal argued, said that multiplication makes the progression more interesting. 8 years of arguing, and now Daniel had finally won with a single patch for the whole world. Calvin laughed, quietly, without malice, the laugh of a man who appreciated the move. Then he stopped laughing. He grew serious and said why he had come. He said he knew about the dev console, not all the details, but enough. He knew that Daniel had access that the players didn't have, the admin panel, the power to change the rules, and he wants to propose an alliance. Daniel asked what kind. Calvin answered simply. He said that they were both designers, both knew how the system worked, both had died and ended up here. There was one difference. Daniel was stuck in a guard's body, patching holes, but Calvin had assembled a guild of the best players and, in 3 months, had risen to a level where he could speak with kings. Together, they could rewrite Ayrton, not patch it, rewrite it. From scratch. A new balance, new rules, a world where everything works as it should. Daniel listened. He knew that tone. Cal at a pre-release meeting.
Eyes ablaze, hands gesturing, voice quickening.
He sees the system, sees how to improve it, and doesn't see the people inside. Daniel asked what would happen to the NPCs, to the locals, in Calvin's new system. Calvin shrugged, said it depended on the balance. Maybe they'd stay as they are, maybe they'll be reworked. Some non-viable elements will have to be optimized. Optimized. Daniel knew that word. In meetings, it meant delete. A non-viable NPC is an NPC that gets erased from the game. Daniel looked Calvin in the eye and said no. Quietly, without anger, without drama. No. Calvin wasn't surprised. He nodded, as if he'd expected it. He said it was a shame, that he'd hoped. But he understood. Daniel had always been like that. He'd always clung to the NPCs for their little stories, for their pointless routes from home to the market and back. At meetings, he fought to ensure every NPC had a name and a daily schedule. Cal considered it a waste of resources.
Now, Cal considered it a waste of the world. Calvin said one last thing. He said he was giving Daniel a week. 1 week. If Daniel didn't change his mind in a week, patchwork would come to Hoengraive. Not the 4 of them, the entire guild. And they would do what they'd planned. They would tear the city apart. They would tear the guard apart. They would find the dev console. And they would use it properly. Not to patch holes. To rewrite the world. Daniel stood there in silence. Calvin turned and walked down the road away. His figure grew smaller in the field until it dissolved into the haze. Daniel remained at the gate. 1 week. The halberd is heavy. The chainmail weighs him down. The sun burns through his helmet. 237 credits. 1 week. A week.
7 days. Daniel spent the first 2 preparing, not for battle, for a siege. He knew Calvin. Cal didn't bluff. If he said he'd come, he'd come. And he'd come not to fight, but to win. Methodically, systematically, like they take down raid bosses.
Study the mechanics. Find windows of vulnerability. Strike at the right moment. Daniel was a raid boss, and Cal would be looking for his mechanics. Daniel spent the first day on reconnaissance. He read the metadata of every resident of Hoengraive, not selectively like before. Everyone. Every single one. Every flag, every trigger, every hidden skill. He was looking for allies. He was looking for those who could help, not because they were strong, but because they were in the right place. Uncle Merrick, the sleeping peacemaker. Tier 3, master of persuasion, 20 regulars. Each of them knew him and trusted him. Leal Varn, healer, Tier 2. The antidotes are ready. 17 concoctions. She hadn't slept in 2 days. When Daniel brought her a full list from the dev shop for 40 credits, she looked at him and didn't ask who he was anymore. She just took the list and got to work. Yena Haldor, apprentice, skill 87. 4 days ago she reforged the city guard's swords, 12 blades. All bearing her mark. All better than her father's. The guards noticed the difference. The swords felt different in their hands, more precise, lighter. Captain Oswald, Tier 2, suspected possession of subordinate, 66%. Stable, not increasing. Daniel was cautious, but Oswald was both the problem and the solution. If the captain of the guard believed him, the city would get a commander. If he didn't believe him, Daniel would be arrested before patchwork arrived. Sadie Morgan, tracker, level 6. She stood at the gate every day, helped check passes, didn't ask why, didn't ask about the letter in Korean, but Daniel could see what she was thinking. The programmer from Portland saw a pattern and was gathering data. Mina So, priestess, level 7. She fed the homeless. She treated those Liel didn't have time for. In the evenings, she sat at the Grey Goose and talked with the old folks. She wasn't a fighter, but after 6 months in the lower quarter, everyone knew her. And everyone trusted her. Daniel drew up a map, not on paper, in his head. 6 people, 6 points in the city. The gate, the tavern, the herb shop, the smithy, the square, the lower quarter. Each in their place, each doing what they know how to do. Not an army, a city. A living city that works. On the 3rd day, Daniel made a decision. He couldn't defend Hoengraive alone. Dev Console gave him tools, but not power. He could change the rules, but he couldn't stop 40 high-level players who decided to pass through the gate. He needed Oswald. That evening, after his shift, Daniel went to the captain's house. A small stone house on Officers Street. Oswald opened the door. He saw Corbin. He said nothing. He let him in. They sat down at the table. Oswald poured some beer. Daniel didn't drink. Oswald noticed. Corbin never turned down a beer. Another note. But now wasn't the time for notes. Daniel spoke. Not like Corbin, not like Daniel. Like a man who was tired of pretending. He didn't tell the truth. Not the whole truth. But he said enough. He said that in 4 days, the Players Guild would arrive in Hoengraive. Organized. Their target is the city. They want to take it over.
use it as a base. They consider the residents expendable. Oswald listened in silence. Then he asked how Corbin knew this. Daniel said he'd spoken with their leader, in person, at the gates, 2 days ago, that the leader had given them a week to think it over, that there was nothing to think about, that in 4 days they would come, and they needed to be ready. Oswald was silent. He drank his beer. He thought. Then he asked the question Daniel had been waiting for. He asked why the guild leader had spoken to an ordinary gate guard and not to the captain or the mayor. Daniel replied that the leader wasn't looking for a guard. The leader was looking for him, personally, because they knew each other from a past life. Oswald set down his mug, slowly, carefully.
The way you put things down when you're in control of yourself. He said that his past life was exactly what he'd wanted to ask about from the very beginning. He asked who was sitting across from him. Daniel paused. Then he said that sitting there was a man who, 2 weeks ago, should have died at the gate. Who didn't die. Who, after that, became a different person. Who isn't possessed, not cursed, not sick. Who simply began to see what he hadn't seen before, and who wants to protect this city, because his children live in this city. He said the last 2 words in Corbin's voice, that very one. Quiet, simple, reliable. Oswald looked at him. For a long time, a minute, 2. Then he nodded, said he didn't understand, that he might never understand, but that a man whose children live in the lower quarter wouldn't lie about an attack on the city, that he is the captain of the guard and his duty is to protect Hoengraive, that tomorrow morning he will assemble the garrison. Daniel nodded. He stood up. He walked to the door. Oswald called out to him. He said one thing. He said that he didn't know who Daniel was, but that Annalee was a good person, and the children were good, and that if, whoever he was, he hurt them, the captain would find him. Daniel turned around, looked Oswald in the eyes, replied that he'd rather die. A second time. He left. That night, Daniel lay next to Annalee. She wasn't sleeping. He knew because her breathing was uneven. She was waiting for him to speak. He didn't speak. Not today. 4 days. Later. If there is a later. Annalee turned her back to him. A minute later, her shoulders shook, quietly, once. She was crying, silently, the way people cry who are used to being strong. Daniel lay there, motionless, because he didn't know whose hand would wipe away those tears, Corbin's or Daniel's. And did she have the right to seek comfort from a stranger who had stolen her husband's face? Daniel spent the 3 days before Patchwork's arrival doing what he did best, preparing the patch. Not just one, a series. He worked at the gate during the day and on the dev console at night. He slept 2 hours at a time. Annalee didn't ask. She saw. She silently set tea on the table and left. She silently washed the sweat-soaked shirt. She silently endured. The first patch, the free 1-week version. Daniel spent 3 days drafting it and rewrote it 5 times. The wording was everything. 1 word out of place and the amendment didn't work, or didn't work at all.
the final version. Within the boundaries of Hoengraive, the act of betraying one's neighbor requires direct eye contact. He didn't use it. Yet. He saved it. It was his last weapon. In case of the worst-case scenario. In case Calvin found agents inside the city. People who, for gold or fear, would raise a hand against their own. The edit made betrayal physically impossible without looking the victim in the eye.
Looking into the eyes of a neighbor you've known for 20 years, whose children you've held in your arms, whose wife you greeted every morning. Daniel believed in people. He believed that most wouldn't be able to. Second Amendment. For credits, Daniel paid 35. Hoengraive city walls restore their integrity at a rate of 1 stone block per minute when damaged. If Patchwork decides to breach the wall instead of the gate, the wall will repair itself, not instantly, but fast enough that 40 players wouldn't be able to breach it. Third edit, 30 credits. A player's weapon loses 10% of its durability for every strike dealt to a Hoengraive resident with peaceful status. Not all residents had peaceful status, not the guards, but the merchants, the children, the elderly. Every strike against a civilian broke the attacker's weapon. 10 strikes, and the sword crumbles in your hands. Fourth edit, 20 credits. The player's movement speed within Hoengraive is reduced by 30% if their inventory contains items obtained by force from the city's residents. You can loot, but after looting, you become slow. The guards will catch up to you. Daniel did the math. 194 minus 35 minus 30 minus 20. 109 credits left. He invested 85 credits in the city's defense. 4 edits, 4 lines. For new laws of physics that made Hoengraive not a fortress, but a city where violence was unprofitable. Pointless. Killing residents yielded no experience. Looting residents slowed you down. Attacking civilians broke your weapons. The walls repaired themselves. The altar required permission. Daniel wasn't building a wall. He was building an ecosystem in which destruction cost more than creation. Just as a good balancer should. At the same time, he was training people, not for battle, for work. Everyone in their place. Oswald trained the guard. 20 men. Jenna swords. Knowledge of formations. Not to fight the players. Tier 0 cannot defeat Tier 20. To evacuate civilians if chaos breaks out. Retreat routes. Assembly points. Shelters. Merrick prepared the tavern. The Grey Goose became a neutral zone. Daniel spent 15 credits on an amendment. Combat skills cannot be used inside the Grey Goose Tavern. The bar became a safe zone. Like a green room in a PvP game, a place where people can talk. Liel distributed antidotes to key people. Annalie, the guards' wives, Hayden's mother, the midwife from the lower quarter. 10 people who knew what to do if someone was poisoned. Sadie and Min-A became the bridge. Sadie talked to the new players. She explained the rules. She said that Hoengraive was a special city, that they played differently here, that here NPCs were people. Some listened, some laughed, but those who listened stayed. Min-A worked with the residents. She explained what players were, not as monsters, as people from another world, lost, confused, sometimes cruel out of fear. She explained it that way because she herself was a player, and because she believed in it. The evening of the last day before Patchwork's arrival. Daniel stood at the gate. Sunset. The fields were empty. The road was empty. Quiet. Sadie stood beside him. She was silent. Then she spoke. She said she knew. Daniel looked at her. Sadie said she was a programmer,
that she saw patterns, that NPCs don't read Hangul, that NPCs don't fix bugs, that the guard at the gate isn't a guard. Daniel was silent. Sadie said she didn't care who he was, that only one thing mattered. He treats the people here like people, and that's enough. Daniel nodded. He said thank you. Sadie nodded back. She went into town. That night, Daniel came home late. The children were asleep. Annalie was sitting at the table, sewing. She saw him and set down her needle. She stood up. She walked over. She stood across from him. Close. She looked up at him because Corbin was a head taller.
She said she knew what was going to happen. That she could tell by his face, by the way he moved, by the way he looked at the children at dinner, like a man looking at them for the last time. She said she wouldn't ask who he was. Not today. She said one thing. Come back. Daniel closed his eyes, opened them. Anneli was standing in front of him, a seamstress from the lower quarter, warm, quiet, smart. A woman who deserved the truth and instead of the truth received silence and a stranger's gaze from familiar eyes. He said he would return. In Corbin's voice, with Daniel's words. Annalie nodded. She kissed him on the cheek, went to sleep. Daniel sat down at the table, took out a notebook, wrote in the common language of Ertan, not in Hangul, in the language Annalie understood. He wrote a single line. If I don't return, read the last page. Turned to the last page, wrote everything, who he is, where he's from, how he ended up in Corbin's body, that Corbin died in that very first second. That he, Daniel, is living his life, that he loves her children, that he's started to love her, that he has no right to do so, that he asks for forgiveness. He closed the notebook, put it on the table, went to bed, didn't sleep. They came at dawn. Daniel stood at the gate and counted 10, 20, 30, 36 players, levels 14 through 22. The entire Patchwork Guild roster minus the leader. Calvin wasn't among them. They lined up in a semicircle in front of the gate. Armor, weapons, a banner with a gear and a patch. Garrett stood at the front. Level 18, Knight. He stepped forward. He said that the Patchwork Guild was declaring Hoengraive a guild-controlled zone, that all residents were required to submit to the new administration, that the guard at the gates could step aside or be eliminated. Daniel stood there, halberd in his hands, chainmail on his shoulders. 1 Tier 0 guard against 36 players. He didn't move. Garrett waited. Footsteps sounded behind Daniel. Oswald. 20 guards, Yena's swords at their belts. They stood at the gate, shoulder to shoulder, Tier 0 and Tier 1, against Tier 14 and above. The math was simple. If a fight broke out, the guards would lose in minutes. Garrett knew that too. He smiled, raised his hand, the signal to attack. 36 players moved toward the gates and stopped, because a girl stood between them and the gates. Sadie Morgan, Pathfinder, level 6, bow on her back, empty-handed. She stood facing the guild and didn't move.
Garrett looked at her. He said she was a player and could leave, that it was none of her business. Sadie replied that this was her city. Garrett laughed. He said the city belonged to the NPCs, the dummies, and that a player who defends the dummies is a bug. Sadie said that then she was a bug. Min-A came out from behind the gate, white scarf, staff with a sun, level 7. She stood next to Sadie, silently. 2 players between the guild and the city, levels 6 and 7. Meat. Disposable material.
By patchwork standards, it was even wasteful to kill them. They gave almost no experience. Garrett stopped laughing. He raised his hand again. 36 moved forward. The first blow landed on the gate. Swords struck the grate. The iron clanged. Daniel stood behind the grate and watched. He waited. 2 players circled around the wall. They found a section where the stones were older and weaker. They began to strike. The wall cracked. A block fell out, and a second later, the stone block fell back into place. On its own. The wall was repairing itself. The players struck again. The block fell out, fell back in, fell out, fell back in. They struck and struck. The wall stood. A minute, 5 minutes, 10. Garrett approached the wall. He looked. He cursed. He ordered them to hit faster. 10 players pounded a single spot. Blocks flew out and fell back into place. The rate of destruction equaled the rate of repair. The wall held. While Garrett was at the wall, the main group went through the gate. The grate was made of iron. It didn't repair itself. Daniel's modification applied to stone walls. The grate was bent within 5 minutes. 20 players entered the city and found the guards. 20 guards under Oswald's command blocked the main street. Behind them, residents crowded together. They didn't run away. They stood there. Old people, women, children. Min-A stood among them. Min-A had been saying something to them all night. Daniel didn't know what, but the people didn't run. The first player struck a guard with a sword. The guard flew into the wall. A second blow, a third. The guard fell. Daniel saw the metadata. The guard's HP was dropping, but slowly, because the players' swords were losing their strength. 10% per strike against a civilian. The guards weren't civilians, but the residents behind them were. And when a player missed or accidentally struck a resident, his sword would crack. The fourth player struck a woman who hadn't managed to get out of the way. His sword snapped in his hand. He stood there with the hilt, staring at the shards. The fifth picked up a purse that had fallen from a merchant's bag. His legs grew heavy. His speed dropped by 30%. Guard Hayden caught up to him in 4 strides and knocked him off his feet. The chaos lasted 20 minutes. Not a fight, chaos. The players were stronger, much stronger, but the city resisted not with force, but with rules. Every action against the residents came at a cost. Every blow broke a weapon. Every looting slowed them down. The altar wouldn't work without consent. Killing an NPC gave no experience. They could destroy everything. But why? For what? 0 experience. Broken weapons. Slowing. And 20 guards who kept getting back up again and again because Liel stood behind the barricade and healed everyone who fell. 20 minutes later, Garrett entered the city through the breach. He looked at his group. 5 with broken swords, 3 slowed down,
One player sat on the pavement and didn't move. His suspicion level in the system had risen to enemy of the city, and all the merchants had closed their shops. He couldn't buy anything. No potions, no food, no repairs. He sat in the middle of a hostile city without weapons, without potions, without access to the altar, and without a single experience point. Garrett was smart. He saw the picture. He saw the system. And he understood. The city could not be taken by force, not because it was strong, because it was designed. Every rule, every amendment, every law of physics worked against the invader and in favor of the resident. It wasn't a defense, it was a balance. Daniel stood at the gate. He didn't come out. He didn't fight. He didn't shout. He stood at his post, halberd in his hands, chainmail on his shoulders, a guard at the gate. Garrett approached him, through the broken bars. He looked.
He said he'd pass the message on to Calvin. He turned around. He led his men away. 36 players were walking back down the road.
No loot, no experience, with broken weapons. The city stood. Daniel stood. The gate stood. The grate needed to be repaired. He opened the dev console. Repairing the damaged city grate, 5 credits. He bought it. The grate was fixed. 89 credits. Oswald approached him, silently, stood nearby, then said he didn't understand how, but that the walls repaired themselves while swords broke from blows against the merchants, that it was impossible, that it was a miracle, or magic, or something he couldn't name. Daniel replied that it was balance. Oswald didn't understand, but he nodded. Calvin arrived 3 days later, alone, unarmed. Daniel stood at the gate. Morning, sun, silence. The city behind him went about its usual life. Merchants had opened their stalls. Children ran through the streets. The grate was intact. The walls stood. Yenna was forging in the smithy.
Liel was sorting through herbs. Merrick was polishing mugs. Hayden stood by the second gate and smiled at passers-by.
The world stood still. Calvin stopped 3 steps away. He wasn't smiling. He said he'd received Garrett's report. He'd studied every revision, every phrase, every law. He said it was beautiful, truly, that in 8 years of working together, he hadn't seen anything better from Daniel. That Hoengraive's defense was the best balance patch anyone had ever written. He fell silent. He looked at the gate, at the walls, at the guard. He spoke more quietly. He said he'd gone through all of Ayrton in 3 months. Level 24, leader of the strongest guild, killed 2 world bosses, unlocked the map all the way to the horizon, and not once had a single person in this world looked at him the way the people of Hoengraive look at the gate guard. He said that in the tavern an old man offered him a beer, for free, just because he looked tired. That a girl at the market gave him an apple.
Just like that. That a freckled guy at the second gate asked if everything was okay. Him, a level 24 player, who had sent an army to this city 3 days ago. Calvin fell silent. He said he didn't understand, that he'd spent 8 years designing NPCs and had never once thought of them as people. That this was the first time he'd seen that they could be people, and that it infuriated him.
because if they were people, then he was a monster. Daniel replied quietly. He said that Cal wasn't a monster, that they were both designers, both saw systems, but Cal saw the system as a mechanism that needed to be optimized, and Daniel saw a garden that needed to be watered. The difference wasn't in morality, it was in perspective. Calvin asked what now. Daniel said there was a choice. Cal could leave, take the guild with him, find another city, or stay. Not as a conqueror, as a resident. Hoengraive needs strong people. It needs those who know the system. It needs balancers. Not just one, many.
Because the world is big, and Daniel stands at just one gate. Calvin smirked. He said that Daniel was offering the leader of Ayrton's strongest guild the chance to become a guard. Daniel shook his head. He said he was offering him the chance to become a gardener. Calvin stood there. For a minute. 2. The wind ruffled his shirt. He said he'd think about it. Turned around. Walked away. Stopped after 10 steps. He turned back. He said in Korean that the patch with the multipliers was, after all, more correctly, multiplicative. And he left. Daniel watched him go. And for the first time in 3 months in Ayrton, he smiled genuinely. Because it was an old joke. Their 8-year-old argument. And if Cal was still joking, that meant the door wasn't closed. Calvin returned 9 days later. Daniel saw him from a distance. A column was coming down the road from the forest. 50 men. The guild. Armor. Weapons. Daniel tensed. His hand rested on his halberd. Corbin's memory sounded the alarm, but the column stopped 100 paces from the gate. Calvin walked alone at the front. He approached. He said he hadn't brought an army. He'd brought people who had nowhere else to go. He said half the guild were players, just them, abandoned here, locked up, with no way out. For 3 months they'd been raiding towns and killing bosses because they didn't know what else to do in a foreign world. He said he'd told them about Hoengraive, about the old man with the beer, about the girl with the apple, about the freckled guy who asked if everything was okay, and half of them wanted to see it for themselves. Daniel looked at the column. 50 armed men at the gates of his city. 50 balancers, conquerors, looters. He opened the dev console. His gaze swept over the formation. Lines flashed above their heads. Class, player. Tier, unknown. No flag. None of them had a scripted flag. The system didn't know what to do with them. They were like him. Holes in the code. Daniel closed the console. He said the city wouldn't accept 50 armed strangers in a single day, that it didn't work that way, that trust isn't a patch you roll out all at once. He said he'd take 10, to start with. Unarmed. Those willing to work, to repair the walls, carry water, teach children to read and write, treat the wounded, not to rule the world, to live in it. Calvin nodded. He said that was fair. He turned to the column. He spoke. Daniel didn't hear the words. He only saw 10 men step out of the ranks. They placed their weapons in a cart, took off their helmets, walked toward the gate on foot, unarmed. One of them was limping. A girl carried a child on her back whom she had found in a ravaged village and couldn't bring herself to leave behind.
an old warrior with a gray beard who had been a tank in the raid for 3 months and before that had taught history in Busan. Daniel checked each one at the gate, just as he checked merchants. Name, where from, why. He wrote it down in the logbook.
Nodded. Let them through. 10 strangers entered Hoengraive, and the gates didn't close behind them. Calvin stayed on the other side, with the rest. He said he'd wait, that he'd see how the first ones settled in, that he'd return in a month. And he led the column back to the forest. By evening, the lower quarter was crowded. 10 new faces. Merrick grumbled that the tavern wasn't made of rubber, but he poured everyone a mug. Liel examined the lame man and applied a bandage. Yenna, the gray-haired historian, to her father in the smithy because he had hands that remembered the hammer. A widow from the next street took in the girl with the child. Daniel watched this from the tavern doorway. He opened the console. New lines slowly appeared above the newcomers' heads. Class, resident, tier -1, no flag. The system had stopped seeing them as wholes. It had started seeing people. Plus 10 credits. Reason, integration of anomalous objects into the social structure. Daniel closed the console and went home. The next morning, a surprise was waiting for him at the gate. Hayden, the guy with freckles, standing there, fidgeting. He said he'd heard about the new people. He said he wanted to learn what Daniel knew how to do, to read the system, to see the rules. Daniel froze. His memory brought back a line he'd read on his first day. Hayden, victim of quest number 19, dies during an attack on a trade caravan. The event in 11 days. More than 11 days had passed since that day. Daniel had ambushed that caravan himself. He rerouted the convoy. He deployed an extra patrol. Hayden was still alive, with freckles. He asked to be taught how to see the world. Daniel opened the console. He looked at the guy. The line above his head flashed and changed. Class, City Guard, Tier 0. Quest target number 19 flagged as eliminated. New status, Balancer candidate. Daniel stared at that line for a long time. Then he spoke. He said yes, that he would teach him. That the first rule of a balancer is simple. You're not a player or an NPC. You're the one who decides which rules can be rewritten. Hayden didn't understand a word, but he nodded as seriously as 20-year-olds do when they're entrusted with an adult's task. Daniel handed him a halberd, placed him beside him, and the two of them stood by the gate together. Teacher and student, guard and guard. The first merchant of the day passed through the gate. Daniel nodded. Hayden nodded after him. The merchant waved to both of them. The day went on. Closer to noon, Mira came running. A daughter. Someone else's daughter who had become his own. She brought her father lunch in a little bundle, bread, cheese, an apple. She said her mom told her to make sure he didn't forget to eat. Daniel crouched down. He took the bundle. He asked how things were at home. Mira chattered away about a doll, about how she'd learned to tie her own apron and was now teaching the neighbor's girl. About how Thomas had gotten into a fight again, but this time he'd been defending a new boy whom everyone was teasing as an outsider. Daniel listened. He stroked her head. With hands that were once someone else's but had long since become his own. Mira ran back inside. Hayden asked if she was his daughter. Daniel answered yes.
He didn't hesitate for a second. Yes, his daughter. That evening he stopped by Liel's. The shop was packed, a line. Newcomers from the guild had brought their people, some with fevers, some with wounds. Liel couldn't handle it alone. Daniel spotted a girl in the line who had come yesterday with a child on her back. She was holding a boy in her arms. The boy was burning up. Liel was rushing between patients. Daniel approached. He asked how he could help. Liel handed him a mortar and a bunch of herbs. She told him to grind them, finely. Daniel ground the herbs with the hands of a guard in the herbalist's shop while it grew dark outside the window.
He opened the console once. He glanced at the boy in the girl's arms.
Class, child. Tier 0. No flag. Fever condition, treatable. He closed the console. The fever is treatable. That means the boy will live. Not because of the script, because Liel knows how to heal, and Daniel knows how to grind herbs. By nightfall, the line had dispersed. The boy was sleeping in the girl's arms. His forehead had cooled. Liel sat down on a stool, tired. She said that 3 months ago this child would have died, not from a fever, because there was no one to pound herbs. And now there's no one with the time because there are too many people and everyone is alive. She said this is a good kind of trouble, the best trouble in 3 years. Daniel nodded. He stepped out into the night. He walked home through the lower quarter, past the well, past Annalie's workshop where the light was still on, past the house of the boy Min A had saved on a rainy night. The boy was already asleep. He reached the blue door,
Opened it, went inside. Annalie was sitting at the table. A notebook lay in front of her.
that very one. But now a second one lay beside it, a new one, a blank one. Annalie looked up. She said she'd been thinking, what if someone else ended up here like him, in a stranger's body, with a stranger's family? Then there should be someone to explain it to. There should be a book, not just one person's diary, a guide. How to live when you wake up not as yourself. Daniel sat down across from her. He picked up the blank notebook. He opened it to the first page. Annalie pushed the ink aside. She said he should start, and she would finish writing what he didn't know, about this world, about people, about how to cook porridge and tie an apron. Daniel dipped his pen. He thought for a moment. He wrote the first line. You didn't die. You woke up in someone else's life. And now you have a choice. You can break it. You can water it. Annalie read over his shoulder. She smiled.
She said it wasn't bad for a start. Daniel wrote until late into the night. Annalie sat beside him and occasionally corrected a word. The candle crackled. The children slept behind the wall. Upstairs, a panel flickered quietly in his peripheral vision. +1 credit. Reason, 1 instance of loneliness fixed. And another line below. New object in the system. Guide for those who've arrived. Status, active. Daniel looked at that line. He realized that the book they were writing had become part of the world, that now it existed not only on paper, but also in code, that the next person to wake up here as a stranger would find it and would not be alone. He closed the console, finished the page, set down the pen. Annalie was already nodding off. He took her to the bedroom. He stayed in the kitchen, sat down. He rested his hands on the countertop,
Corbin's hands, his own hands. In the morning he would get up, put on his chainmail, take the halberd bearing the mark of Yenna.
Wake up, Hayden, because it was the apprentice's first solo shift. Go out into the street, walk through the lower quarter, past the well and the workshop and the house of the boy with the apple. He'll reach the gate, he'll take his post. The apprentice will stand beside him, and in a month, Calvin will come from the forest and bring 10 more, and another month after that, more. And one day, at every gate of Ayrton, there will stand not a victim of the script, but a man who chose to stand. Somewhere on the horizon above the shining tower, the clouds were parting. Warm light fell on the fields, on the road, on the walls of Hoengraive, on the gates that stood open. Tomorrow, the first merchant of the new day will pass along this road, a boy with a cart of apples. Daniel will salute him. Hayden will follow suit. The boy would wave to both of them, and the day would begin. Just as every day begins in a city where the rules are written by those who live here. In a city where the guard stands at the gate, not because he has to, but because he chose to. And where, for everyone who one day wakes up a stranger, the first page has already been written. You didn't die. You woke up in a stranger's life. Decide what you're going to do with the gate.